Oh man, the Houston Texans. Where do I even start with today's video? The Texans are just the laugh of the NFL right now. The Colts are terrible. Everybody is just awful. So that is what we're going to be talking about in today's video. My NFL reactions. These are my first reaction. This is my first reaction video. We're going to be going over some of the NFL games, some of the laughs that happened. The Colts being one of them, the Jags, the Cowboys obviously allowing the Jags, and the Commanders, bro. What are the Commanders doing right now? We're going to talk about all of that, so let's hop into the video. But first, if you're new to the channel, welcome to the Sports Lovers, or welcome back to the Sports Lovers. We post daily sports content. So let's hop into the video. Alright, so the first game of the day, I'm just going to go through the games right here, is the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks. That was the Thursday night football game. Brock Purdy, again, obviously putting on a show. 17 for 26, 217 yards, and 2 touchdowns. McCaffrey had a touchdown. Jordan Mason, 4 carries for 64 yards. He was also a big part of the run game that night, on Thursday night. And the top receivers were obviously George Kittle having 4 receptions for 93 yards and 2 touchdowns. So obviously a big night for the 49er offense as the 49ers get the win over the Seattle Seahawks. We'll look at their stats now too. The Seahawks, Geno Smith was 31 for 44, which wasn't terrible, for 238 yards, 1 touchdown, and no interceptions. That's not that bad of a game. It's just the 49ers played a better game defensively. Kenneth Walker had 12 carries and averaged 47 yards, no touchdowns for all of the rushing players. But it looks like Kenneth Walker did have a pretty decent game running the ball. Tyler Lockett had 7 receptions for 68 yards. He was their leading receptions in terms of yards-wise. And Noah Fant had the only touchdown of the game. And he had 5 receptions for 32 yards, which obviously it wasn't that bad of a day either. Their defense looks like it didn't do too bad. And I just think the 49ers were the better team here in this game. But I do think that the 49ers, they clinched the NFC West, and I don't think the Seahawks are going to make the playoffs anymore. That is the Thursday night football game. Let's move on to the first game of the Sunday games. Up first, on the first Saturday game, we have the Colts and the Vikings. Man, what did I say? Almost a trap game for Minnesota, but the Colts decided that they were going to blow the game in the second half and acted like it really didn't matter. JT got hurt, which was a big part of that, but I just think that the Colts just gave the game away is what it looked like. Matt Ryan was 19 for 33 for 162 and 1 touchdown. Not a terrible game, but they could have done better had they finished out the game. If they would have scored 1 more touchdown in the second half, they would have won this game easily. Just because I don't think the Vikings would have stayed that long. They wouldn't have anything to believe in. But if the Colts would have scored 1 more touchdown, they would have won the game. It's that simple. Zach Moss was their leading rusher. 24 attempts for 81 yards. Not a bad run day. Deion Jackson had 13 carries for 55 yards. And Michael Pittman had 2 carries for 30 yards. That's shocking to me. Isn't he a wide receiver? They're using him the same way the Niners are using Debo. Let's just put it that way, guys. Up next, Michael Pittman was their leading target in receiving. He had 10 receptions for 60 yards. Not a bad day. The only touchdown was scored by Deion Jackson, and he had 1 catch for 1 yard and 1 touchdown. I guess they just threw it to him on that touchdown, apparently. We didn't watch most of the game. Their defense didn't look terrible. Julian Blackmon had a pick. Rodney Thomas had a pick as well. So the Colts defense didn't look terrible. Now let's talk about the Vikings. In passing, Kirk Cousins was 34 for 54. Not terrible for 460 yards. He's having an elite day. What can I say? 12 o'clock noon. Kirk Cousins is elite. Kirk's just that good. I honestly think the Vikings are the third, if not second best team in the NFC behind the Eagles. That 49ers defense, though, is killing it lately. They are a tough team to beat as well. Those are the top 3 teams in the NFC right now in terms of standings and record-wise. And they just look that good on paper as well. He had 2 interceptions, though. I believe both of those were in the first half, if I'm not mistaken. So after that, they just went off. They scored pretty much all their points in the second half. Largest comeback in the history of the NFL to date. Jeff Saturday, I don't know what you were thinking. For rushing, Dalvin Cook, obviously their leading rusher, 17 carries for 95 yards. He had an amazing day in fantasy. I don't know what the heck, where has that been all year for me, but he had an amazing day in fantasy. I didn't need it. Why did he have to have it now? Why couldn't he have had it later? I don't know. Jalen Reagor had 1 carry for -5 yards. The rushing touchdown was C.J. Ham, 2 carries for 1 yard and 1 touchdown on the day. Receiving, KJ Osborne had 10 receptions for 157 yards. He was their leading receiver and a touchdown. Justin Jefferson had 12 receptions for 123 yards. Also, their number one also had a touchdown. Dalvin Cook had a touchdown. Adam Thielen had a touchdown. Hawkins Sox didn't do terrible. He had 33 yards for 3 receptions. Not bad on the day for him. But those are just some of the highlights of receiving. Their defense didn't look terrible. They looked god-awful in the first half, don't get me wrong. But in the second half, they started to pick the pace up, which allowed them to win the game. That is all for the Vikings and the Colts. Now moving on to the second Saturday game, which is the Browns and the Ravens. Let me just get it here real quick. The Ravens are terrible without Lamar. It's that simple. If they didn't have Lamar, they would be the worst team in the NFL right now, in my opinion. They've lost 2 straight without Lamar. I don't think Lamar's coming back for another week. So, we'll talk about the Ravens first. Tyler Huntley, not terrible, 17 for 30 and 1 pick, 138 yards on the day, which isn't terrible. J.K. Dobbins was their leading rusher, 13 carries for 125 yards. Mark Andrews was their leading receiver for 3 receptions, 31 yards. And that's pretty much it. They didn't score a touchdown at all. The Ravens looked god-awful yesterday. The Browns is what happened. Deshaun Watson didn't do too great. I hate to say that, but he didn't do terrible. He was 18 for 25 for 161 yards and a touchdown. He actually threw for a touchdown, surprisingly, I know. Nick Chubb did amazing again. He's Nick Chubb. He does what Nick Chubb does. At 21 carries for 99 yards. You can't beat that when you're the Ravens defense. The only touchdown for receiving was really Peoples-Jones had 1 touchdown. Amari Cooper was 4 for 58. Not terrible. Again, just a decent day for the Browns, but they find a way to win the game because the Ravens are just not good without Lamar, apparently, which we've seen for the past 2-3 weeks. So I don't think the Ravens are going to make the playoffs at all whatsoever. Up next, the last game of the day. It was very interesting, back and forth all game long. The Bills and the Dolphins. That was an incredible game to watch. If you guys didn't watch it, what a game. I tried to watch some of it. I was at work, though, got held up. But it did look to be an amazing game. Tua was 17 for 30 for 234 yards, which is great. 2 touchdown passes as well. Their rushing core was amazing. Raheem Mostert, 17 for 136. Doesn't get much better than that. He even beat Dalvin Cook. I should have started him in fantasy over Dalvin Cook. But Ahmed also had 6 carries for 43 yards and a touchdown. Their only rushing touchdown of the day. Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill both scored a touchdown. Waddle with the leading receivers for 3 receptions and 114 yards. Tyreek Hill 9 for 69 yards. Nice. But anyway, that is pretty much the day for the Miami Dolphins. They did have an interception. The defense didn't have any interceptions, it looks like. And Raheem Mostert kicked, I don't even know what I was going to say there. Scratch that part, on to the Bills. Josh Allen didn't look too bad either. He was 25 of 40, which is almost 50%. Congratulations. But he had 340 yards and 4 touchdowns. That's how they were able to win the game. Josh Allen had 10 carries for 77 yards, ran the ball a few times. Devin Singletary, 13 for 42. James Cook, 5 for 34. Stephon Diggs had negative rushing yards. Yes, sir. Attaboy, Stephon. Got me 5 points, by the way. If you're watching this, do better. Dawson Knox had 6 receptions for 96 yards and a touchdown. Quentin Morris and Naeem Hines both had touchdowns for receiving touchdowns, along with James Cook. All of their touchdowns came for receiving. But that's the day for the Bills, I guess. The Bills' defense is probably what won in the game, if I'm not mistaken. Josh Allen looked elite, as always. Josh Allen and the Bills, you can't stop them when they're in their groove. And moving on to the Sunday games. We have the Eagles and the Bears. Jalen Hurts, 22 for 37. He didn't look great at all. 315 yards and 2 picks, no touchdowns whatsoever. The Eagles didn't look great on Sunday, but they found a way to win, and that's what matters. Jalen Hurts had 3 rushing touchdowns, 17 carries for 61 yards. Their leading rusher was Miles Sanders for 42 yards and 11 carries. A.J. Brown had no touchdowns. Nobody in the receiving corps didn't look terrible. A.J. Brown and Devontae both had over 100 yards receiving. Can't stop that duo. And Jalen Hurts scored all their rushing touchdowns. Not much to say there. Jalen Hurts is just making his case for MVP even more. He's winning MVP. Justin Fields, 14 for 21 with 152 yards and 2 touchdown passes. David Montgomery also ran the ball in for a touchdown. Brian Pringle had a receiving touchdown. David Montgomery had a receiving touchdown. The receiver corps did not look great. Nobody on the receiving corps hit over 100 yards on the day. But you got to do what you got to do, I guess, the Bears. They're not playing anymore. They almost ruined some of the Eagles' chances, but they did look good overall. The Eagles, I thought, looked very good. Up next, it was a very interesting game, is the Lions and the Jets. Jared Goff was 23 for 38 and 1 touchdown for 252 yards. You can't stop Jared Goff. He's on fire. And my Panthers play him, which I don't need that to happen next week, please. So let's just do that again. DeAndre Swift had 8 carries for 52 yards, which wasn't terrible from DeAndre Swift. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 1 carry for 6 yards. I just point that out because he's a wide receiver and he doesn't run the ball a lot. Their only touchdown of the day was Brock White, I assume. Their defense had an interception, probably a pick 6, I would assume. So the Lions just look like the Lions. Keep doing what you're doing and you'll make the playoffs, am I right? I think the Lions are going to plead their case for the playoffs as well. Zach Wilson was 18 for 35, 317, 2 touchdowns, and 1 pick. Zach's back. Zach is going to prove the Jets wrong, obviously. That's what he's looking to do here. Receiving, 2 touchdowns for C.J. Uzomah, War Eagle, baby. We love C.J. That's about it for the Jets, though. Not a terrible day for them either. It was just a good defensive battle throughout the game. Up next, the Steelers and the Panthers. I'm going to be honest, we did not look that great. Chuba Hubbard couldn't run the ball. We called run plays every single play, and we know it doesn't work. I don't know what Steve Wilkes was doing on that play. Mitch Trubisky looked amazing as stepping in for Kenny Pickett. The Steelers just beat us down. There's not much to say about that. We had a chance to win the game, don't get me wrong. We had our chances with that stop at the end of the game, but I just didn't see us winning that game from the start. If you can't run the ball, which is what we do on offense the most, we love to run the ball, and the Steelers just shut us down defensively. And they also ran the ball. They wore our defense out. They had the second longest play in NFL history, by the way. The Steelers' 21-play drive also tied the record with the San Francisco 49ers back in 2015, I want to say. But the Steelers just looked great. The Panthers obviously didn't do what they do best, which is run the ball. That's my assumption of that game. No more to talk about there. Obviously, I already know what Sam Darnold did. If you guys watched, you know what Sam Darnold did. Didn't look terrible, but the Steelers just looked like the better team, obviously. We're still making the playoffs, don't get me wrong. This is our time. Got to win out for the division. And the Bucs have to lose out, which I think they can do. They're playing a Cardinals team that's looking iffy. But other than that, they should be able to lose out. It's our time, baby. Don't get me wrong. Let's get it. Up next, the Texans. The Houston Texans. Kansas City, how do you almost lose to that game, bro? You have to win that game easily, just like the Dallas Cowboys. You can't expect to be a top tier team in the NFL and almost lose to the Houston Texans. That's not how this game works. Yes, I'm ranting. I'm on Patrick Mahomes' side. He was 36 for 41 and 2 touchdowns. Not a bad day, but the Texans found a way to score again. Honestly, I think the Texans should be able to win a game. If they play like they've been playing these next couple of weeks, I think the Texans should win a game. I'll make a deal right here. If the Texans win another game, I will buy a DH Gate jersey. You guys can quote me on that. I just don't see the Texans winning another game after what happened this week and last week with the Dallas Cowboys. The Chiefs just looked... Mahomes did what Mahomes does, but the Texans just found a way to win. I don't know how. Don't ask me. I'm not to judge, but it just looked bad for the Chiefs defensively, apparently. Up next, the Falcons and the Saints. The Saints won a game. Credit to Dennis Allen and Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton looked great. Desmond Ridder didn't look too bad in his second start, I believe. 13 for 26 and 97 yards. Not terrible. But the Saints were the better team at that day. They also hosted in the Superdome, so that helped them a lot. But the Saints won 21-18. The Saints looking like if they do that every game, they will look like a playoff team. But they're not making the playoffs, guys. The NFL is just too stacked. The NFC is stacked. Every team from the East will make the playoffs. And the Panthers will win the NFC South, baby. Let's freaking get it. But the Saints didn't look too bad. Andy Dalton didn't look terrible either. Andy Dalton's back, apparently. He just needed some games